I've platinumed Assassin's Creed Shadows, and it was surprisingly okay.
Oh, my wig!
I know this doesn't sound too positive, but coming from someone who has not been able to get an above-average gaming experience from Ubisoft in a very long time, this is actually kind of huge. There are many things that Shadows does right. A beautiful environment that changes looks with seasons, making the play space feel fresh way before it would start to look repetitive, a pool of objectives that is impressively expansive and adds a lot of flavor to its world, and writing that nearly verges on being good at times. There are many things to be appreciated here, things that made me say, holy shit, this is actually kinda good, but it also features the usual Ubisoft drivel. Repetitive collectibles, unjustifiable microtransactions in a single-player €80 game, a Battle Pass-esque system that feels out of place, a story that descends into dullness, and I also have a bone to pick with the environment itself from a gameplay design perspective. Make no mistake, yes, ACS is better than the average Ubisoft game, but it's still held back by archaic designs that Ubisoft is still unwilling to let go of. This is what we'll be exploring in this video. Now, I want to make one thing very clear before we get into the review proper. Discourse about this game on the internet has been f***ing exhausting. In this review, I won't be evaluating ACS based on culture war bullshit. I'll evaluate it based purely on what it puts forward and my experience with it. After all, complaining about historical accuracy in a series that is about playing with history, and history not being as we know it, makes you look pretty stupid. Oh, some people are upset about Yasuke being a samurai? Oh geez, I sure hope no one is gonna remember fist fighting the Pope in an underground futuristic vault made by the creators of humanity. Christ. Regardless of what you may think of Yasuke, he is a historical figure in Japan's history. Are his feats embellished? Sure, but this is a game in a series where history is used as a setting, not as an anchor. I do have, let's say, a bit of a conspiracy theory about this entire situation, but I will bring it up much later because I don't want to compromise discussing my genuine views over the experience. Assassin's Creed Shadows is set in 1580s Japan. From a technical perspective, the game runs well on a PS5, although it does have you choose between quality and performance. It's something that I see is increasingly common in big budget games, and honestly, every time I see it, to me it translates to we didn't know how to code this shit, so we're giving you the choice between 60 FPS or lower FPS but higher graphical fidelity. And irrespective of your choice, the game struggles a lot in your hideout, even if there's nothing there but the bare minimum. Now, the game is gorgeous, and I'll be honest, at no point did I expect Ubisoft to not get this right. Making the environment beautiful is the one thing I'd say they managed to do consistently, irrespective of whether a game is a failure or not. But I do think that this setting represents a unique challenge because Japan does have a very distinct ambience. I'm talking clashing colors, that motif of numerous leaves brushing in the wind. Ghost of Tsushima is a really good example in this respect because of how it goes out of its way to assault your visual senses. It's a genuinely gorgeous game. Now, at first, I was not really blown away. The game looked good, sure, but I felt that it lacked what I expected out of this setting specifically, until the seasons changed. The seasons are a fantastic component because they do so much to freshen the environment, and they're spaced out enough to let you get used to the general aesthetic of the season while never overstaying to the point of becoming bland. Summers and springs have this vibrant and lush aesthetic, autumns have this strong clash between green and orange trees, and as the season progresses you get beautiful views with leaves rustling in the wind, and come winter everything is covered in this thick layer of crystal white snow. It's a very smart way of recycling the environment, and this is not even doing it justice because there's a lot of details to be enjoyed. Bodies of water can freeze and running will make you slip, the snow slows you down, NPCs react to the cold, run away when it rains. I've even seen people showcasing time-lapses about snow slowly melting away or rain affecting the tides, and I'm sure there's a lot more that I've missed. And it's all complemented by really strong sound design. Does this all affect gameplay functionality? Not really, but in this house, we love the big D. Detail. Not dick. Or, well, both. Now, in terms of the game's protagonists, I'd consider this to be another really high point. Back in 2015, Syndicate was released, featuring 2 protagonists, which was a first for the series. Mainly because Ubisoft believed female leads don't sell. Casual corporate misogyny aside, while it was neat, I felt that they didn't have much of a separate unique identity in gameplay. You could realistically use either twin for any situation unless the game would limit you. 9 years later, Shadows returns to that idea, and this time around, it's done so much better. Yasuke is a towering man, he's a vicious fighter, absolutely brutal in combat, and can just break through gates by virtue of sheer force. He's very clearly the more combat-oriented protagonist, very tanky, strong attacks, etc, etc. But at the same time, he's also very cumbersome. He's very slow, very sluggish when it comes to parkour because of his size. There are a lot of viewpoints he can't even get to. He could be used for stealth, but he's hard to hide and is otherwise painfully unsubtle when it comes to assassinations. Instead, that's where Naoe shines. And I have to say, the contrast was very physical. Switching from Yasuke to Naoe felt like playing as the world's tiniest assassin, and that feeling is a great introduction as to what are the differences between them. Naoe is very nimble, very fast, and can easily traverse vertically with her hook. Love the hook, by the way, strong Mission Impossible vibes. She also has the series' signature eagle vision, to which Yasuke doesn't have access to, and it lets her map out where the enemies are for a stealthy approach. The game achieves two very distinct identities in Naoe and Yasuke, and these differences are also complemented by many small details as well. Naoe showcases her athletic prowess by doing front flips, dips and splits while she parkours. Ropes snap under Yasuke's weight, and when he does a leap of faith, he just crashes into the haystack and destroys it. It's pretty funny, but also very purposeful in highlighting their differences. Even when it comes to the activities they can engage in, Naoe prefers meditation and drawing, while Yasuke trains his kata and practices horseback archery. There's a lot of depth to be enjoyed in their differences, a lot of detail to be appreciated. When it comes to the game's combat, this is where things get weird. You see, in my case, the game's biggest disadvantage is the fact that I've played Ghost of Tsushima like right before Shadows. And I want to make another thing clear. I am not going to accuse ACS of copying Tsushima, and frankly, I'd go as far as to defend it. I think that when you share a setting as well as the action-adventure and stealth genre, there's inevitably going to be a lot of overlap. And while I don't think this is inherently an indicator of plagiarism, I do think that it very much sets them up for comparison. Hell, the games are so similar that sometimes I use Tsushima's control scheme in Shadows by mistake and got very confused. At any rate, unfortunately, this is not a comparison that is flattering to Shadows. Is the combat fluid? Yes. Are the animations of high fidelity? Yes. However, it doesn't have that same extent of natural flow. It's a bit of a nitpick, I'll admit, but whenever you hit an enemy you have this slight slow-mo that hiccups the flowiness of combat, the animations are sometimes glitchy, out of sync, or don't follow up well, the game is over-designed with tells to literally every attack, it doesn't need you to observe and read enemies, which is what made Ghost of Tsushima's combat very satisfying. It also runs into the issue of enemies getting stuck in repetitive attack patterns, which I found to be very annoying, just some dude doing the same string of unblockable attacks over and over again. And I found it overall quite repetitive, despite giving you several weapon types to play with. The pool of individual abilities is not actually that expansive, so what you'll end up doing is use the same two abilities throughout your encounters. The game doesn't even encourage you to switch weapons mid-combat. It has that feature, but it doesn't provide any advantages against enemy types or the weapons they wield. This is especially surprising, because it's been quite a while since I've played Origins and Odyssey, I've skipped Valhalla and Mirage entirely, and yet the combat doesn't just feel pretty much the same as it did back then, but it still suffers from a lot of the same problems. The repetitiveness of combat, silly things like running your katana through someone's fucking neck and them being fine because they still got the HP, and the combat system overall just boggling down to a numbers game where enemies get exponentially tankier. There's no added difficulty or new mechanics that open new considerations to your approach, just the need to grind for more levels and better equipment. And I also have to laugh at how the game handles you attacking enemies that are of a much higher level than you, in the sense that it doesn't, they straight up kill you in one hit. In fact, vis-a-vis this, what genuinely pissed me off is to go to an area with a certain quest that is indicated to be at my level, travel all that damned distance, and yet somehow find someone who's high enough in level to kill me immediately. This happened like 4 times, which is not a lot, but it's still surprising that it did. Now, this is not to say that it necessarily limits what you can explore. You're fine as long as you don't get into combat, but all things considered, overall, this system does strike me as rather rigid and formulaic, especially because I don't feel like it has changed for the past few years. To be completely honest though, for the purpose of this review, I do want to say that I don't consider the combat system to be bad per se. I recognize that I have a tendency to paint things in a more negative light than they actually are. I do think that this combat system is quite serviceable. I'm sure a lot of people would enjoy it. Hell, I know I had a lot of times I did too. My critiques simply come from the perspective that, at this point, I did expect something more after developing several iterations of this system. Now, some of you may say that some of the same grievances can be brought up against Ghost of Tsushima too, and I can see where you'd come from. You do after all have only one weapon option throughout the game. While that's true, the game has various ways to engage you throughout your encounters, like the stance system that you have to use mid-combat to gain advantages against specific enemies with certain weapons. Enemies do get tankier, sure, but they also improve their abilities in combat. They light their weapons on fire, their archers learn new techniques, etc. The experience feels like a crescendo, while Shadows felt constant in this regard, eventually growing stale, because without the numbers, the combat feels the same from start to end. In terms of stealth, there are a few touches that I actually think are genuine improvements over the past systems. Guards can hear that little click from the hidden blade, and are also a lot more cognizant of their surroundings. It's an improvement that makes them act a lot more human rather than silly static props. Castles have servants that warn guards about your presence rather than being random people that do nothing. Side note, it is a bit weird that you can kill them without consequence, especially because of the don't harm the innocent thing the series has going for it. I guess your innocence really depends on who you work for, and the bushes can now be cut down, which I think is a real improvement since tall grass and such fields tend to be quite overpowered in a stealth setting in pretty much every game that has them. All in all, this is shockingly solid. Let's now direct our attention to the world as a play space, because Shadows made me ask myself some deeper questions about what exactly is an open world. And regrettably, I don't say this positively. Let me explain. When I was traveling through the world, trying to reach places and essentially attempting to cut through forests, I started feeling rather restrained. You see, I soon realized that the map is just made out of large areas connected through roads. Trying to cut through other areas is an uphill battle. Quite literally, the terrain is often too steep to scale. The technology of scaling hills from Assassin's Creed 3 is nowhere to be found. Seriously, you guys did this before. What happened? Why would you ignore something that you've already created? If the terrain doesn't get you, there's loads of foliage that is constantly in your face and makes navigation an absolute pain. There is a very clear design mindset at play here that is about making these areas discouraging to cut through. That's when the question hit me. What exactly is an open world? Is it just areas that can be explored in a non-linear way? I mean, arguably, this would mean that a series like Dark Souls also features open worlds. I know this is to some extent a false equivalence, but let's take a look at the game's full map, and then leave only the areas with activities and paths connecting them. All of a sudden, it doesn't feel as open, does it? That's when it became clear to me just how heavy-handed the restriction on your navigation feels. It's a human thing to want the shortest route from point A to point B. I often find myself going through people's houses to get where I need faster, and I'm often told, "You're not supposed to be here." And I ask them, "Oh, I'm sorry, do you work for Ubisoft?" Jokes aside, navigation simply doesn't feel great. If you try to cut through these areas, you'll eventually get frustrated and try to stick to the roads, which involves a lot of checking the map, making sure you're still on the right path, didn't go the wrong way, or just hope that two places connect in a convenient way. I eventually gave up on the pretense of navigation entirely and just used the game's built-in GPS. And that's just a really poor showing on the design of the world itself. Now, this is not to say that the issue is exclusive to Shadows' open world. Obviously, there are many other games where the same could be said, but it's the only game where this problem is so prominent that it made me actually critically think about what I expect from an open world. I already know what some of you are thinking, local man angry over roads. But wouldn't you know it, we can look at Ghost of Tsushima for a really good example of the opposite open world design mindset. Whereas Shadows focuses a lot on putting random foliage everywhere, Tsushima is almost always open and easy to navigate, and looks stunning too. Why in the world would you not have these beautiful fields? Just look at how they flow. Oh, such a good game. Apart from that, Shadows has the same ubiquitous, yes, I'm still proud of that pun, collectibles and collectible type activities that infect pretty much every single Ubisoft game ever. Numerous, repetitive, and bloating the entire experience with unenjoyable busy work. And the thing that gets me is that the game starts out so promising. You have activities involving the art of painting illustrations that go by a name that I don't know and won't even try to pronounce, by sneaking and observing animals. The paintings are really cute and the activity plays into the character's development and history. Then you have Kujikiri, the meditative practice of making hand signs, and yes, my mind went there. I found myself really liking how you get into this meditative trance represented by the filter, how the button prompts start to disappear because you yourself are getting into a rhythm. And to top it off, you'd gain access to small side stories that explore Naoe's past. It was so much better than your regular Ubisoft collectible / side activity, and I found myself genuinely intrigued. What's there not to like? I say innocently as I read the script, fully knowing what comes next. These first moments with these activities are unfortunately woefully unrepresentative on the whole. Kujikiris don't feature more than just about 2 side stories and are then downgraded to a simple rhythm game. Yasuke's kata practice is just a series of QTEs. And look, I am happy that these activities are based on culture, but they just end up being repetitive busywork rather than a break from gameplay or something that tells you more about these characters that you play as. The other collectibles don't fare much better. There are many locations where you have to find sites of prayer or collect scrolls, and they just end up being this repetitive chore where you have to look for them over and over again. And you have to do these things because they give you knowledge, which is the only way to gain access to more abilities, passives, and upgrades. It's just not great, it's not fun, and it's Ubisoft at its finest. In fact, here's something fun. There are so many collectibles that only now, in the editing phase, I found out some that I never even knew about. What the fuck is an origami butterfly? This is what makes it so frustrating to talk about this company. This idiosyncratic stubbornness and unwillingness to change an aspect of their design that has been flawed for years. Except for the paintings, those are still cool, and I love that you can find creatures of myth.
You, you're cool.
There is, however, a saving grace, and that's the objective board. Your main goal in Shadows will be to dismantle the Shinbakufu. But there are also several other groups and organizations that you'll hear about, and I genuinely mean many. I was quite surprised to still find out more and more groups even later in my playthrough, and I think these groups make expert use of the huge play space. They are spaced out enough and become active to interact with in a way that doesn't feel like you just run into loads of these people randomly. For those of you who have played Shadow of Mordor, I think we all remember how the game had this neat system of numerous leaders, but it was constrained to a play space that was quite small. It was very easy to just run into random leaders every few seconds in a way that felt reductive of the system itself. ACS doesn't suffer from that issue because of how well their design focused on spacing them out. This is not to say that you won't ever randomly run into one while doing something else. You will, but it managed to achieve this in a way that felt a lot more natural. Now, the way they are spaced out throughout the world is not the sole thing that impressed me here. I feel that in Assassin's Creed games, the narrative hyper-focuses on the conflict between assassins and Templars, without acknowledging that the world is much bigger than that. In a land torn by civil conflicts, there's bound to be a lot more than just you and your group and the enemies. This is what Shadows captures extremely well. You have groups of various interests, corrupt officials, bandits, pirates, even groups that relate to Nae or Yasuke's stories. At its basis, this acknowledgement of a wider world beyond just you, dare I say, and I can't believe I'm genuinely unironically going to say this, it made the world feel alive. I never thought I'd say this about a Ubisoft game, but credit where credit is f***ing due. This feature is great. There are so many details and unique things to be appreciated here. How some groups will feature unique responses if you go after a specific person. Like early on, you'll run into a family-led group and each individual features a response to killing the head of the family. Some will try to avenge them, while others are set free, able to just walk away as they cut ties. This is another thing that is amazing about this system. These people people aren't just individuals that you have to kill. Sometimes they have a small narrative and reasoning for being in these groups, and you're given the opportunity to empathize with them and understand them, going as far as actively deciding whether or not you think the world is better off without them. Sometimes they interact with the game's wider systems, as you're able to recruit some individuals to your own cause. Sometimes you just have no reason to kill them. They can be friendly acquaintances from Naoe or Yasuke's past, they can be misunderstood individuals, or even people masquerading as creatures of myth. They may do so for their own selfish reasons, but killing them is quite extreme. You wouldn't realistically murder children just because they paint themselves green and annoy some people. Sometimes the choice is out of your hands entirely, as some targets renounce their groups and are long gone before you can do anything about it. It's a small exercise in disempowerment that does wonders in telling you that while the world is your play space, your control isn't absolute. Not everyone's story is yours to control. It's a great way to pull you back into the realism that you don't control the world, but merely influence it. It's true that a lot of the times these groups don't receive much substantiation outside of being groups that have to be dismissed for the sake of the locals, but in a way that also contributes to the realism of it. Sometimes you just interact with people in passing that don't have you as a prominent character in their stories, and neither are they in yours. It's just that circumstances bring you head to head. It's a really good system, and at times I actively wondered how fantastic it would be if, rather than bloating the world with collectibles and repetitive activities, they would have focused solely on this system. I don't think I would have given a singular f*** about there being no collectibles. In fact, I would have been blown away by the choice. Let's wrap up this review by also discussing the story, and to avoid spoilers, I'll stick only to giving specific examples from the first 1 or 2 hours of gameplay, basically the prologue section. Later on, I will issue a spoiler warning, as I do want to talk about the ending, because it did strike me as really underwhelming and to some extent even oddly incomplete. Now, Yasuke's inclusion as a protagonist was particularly interesting to me. I mean, Ubisoft has a track record of nearly exclusively having white men as protagonists, so the inclusion of a black man as a protagonist was very strange because we finally get something different, but it's also in a setting where another ethnicity entirely is at focus. It did feel weird, like taking away from the cultural presence that the game would have, but I was willing to be permissive of it as long as they'd managed to do something interesting. And they did. In the very beginning, Yasuke is called Diogo. He's a sword-bearing slave in the service of the Jesuits, and as you can imagine, his masters are not particularly fond of him. But in trying to gain free passage from Nobunaga, he finds himself intrigued about Diogo. It's this clash of cultures represented beautifully through this single line.
この黒き者、モノノフの気性があるようだ。そなたの窮地を察すや否や、部屋のあらゆる危険に目を走らせおったぞ。
Nobunaga sees Diogo for his skill and caution, rather than his status, like the Jesuits do. This is solid writing, and in a backwards sense, rather risque. I mean, God forbid your game discusses slavery in any capacity nowadays.
I'm gonna go ahead and let y'all know now I will be using the N-word.
This very much captured my attention, because the writing, for once, in a very long time, in a Ubisoft game, threatened to be good. Unfortunately, it then proceeds to fall hard into the many pitfalls of poor writing, many of which are a staple for Ubisoft games. You have a character that is meant to be very important for a protagonist, but they die way too early in the story for you to establish a connection and genuinely care. You have villains who are barely characterized, don't receive nuance, and aren't humanized beyond just being representative of the general concept of being bad. The pacing is very strange, going from past to future to just a few hours in the past, then way back further into the past before returning to the future, and then some sections that bring you to the past again. Why would you have a tutorial after I've already been onboarded onto how combat works? It's very messy, and while I know that some of these escapades into Naoe's past are meant to make you care about her father, trying to do this posthumously is an uphill battle, because the gig is up. He's dead. It's hard to convince me now to put effort into making me care. I also feel like the process of setting up your league is very unconvincing. You immediately gain access to contracts and scouts, you buy hideouts by just purchasing them on the map. It doesn't manage to establish itself as something you made, it doesn't make you feel like a leader of a group. Rather, it simply feels like a new game feature you gain access to. And listen, I really like how you can send scouts to investigate stuff, because in some small part it shows your control. It conveys this sense of you putting your league against others, but it needed so much more to immerse me into this fantasy. I also don't feel like the narrative keeps itself interesting by having strong characters with different perspectives. And look, I like this sense of you putting together this merry band, but you go through a story that barely features any nuance. There's no psychological conflicts or anything that elevates Naoe's or Yasuke's or even the guild's journey and development. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that most of the characters you meet are really forgettable. And I'm sorry to make this essentially a comparison video, although I do find it useful because I can say things vaguely in a way that doesn't spoil both games. But Ghost of Tsushima still serves as a benchmark of what I expect. If you were to ask me about the major characters of Tsushima's story, I would remember them. And I say that not only because the cast of characters is smaller and more concise, not only because they have strong personalities and stories of their own, but also because their perspectives are understandable, they make sense, and their influence shapes the story in a way that works fantastically well. Hell, even the villain is, in my opinion, an amazing piece of writing. All of these things I cannot say about Shadows. All of these things combined made the narrative as a whole rather boring. I would also criticize how the game flows between gameplay and cutscenes. I remember cutscenes where you choose between who to play as between Naoe and Yasuke, and the one you didn't choose just ceases to exist when you return to gameplay. Or times when NPC guards evaporate for a cutscene and then rematerialize after it's done. It's quite amateur, it doesn't carry the immersion, and on top of that we have a very painful lack of attention to detail. There are quite a few times where characters speak Japanese, even though it doesn't make sense for them to do so. Like, you have a flashback from Yasuke's past, way before going to Japan, on what I think is a Portuguese ship, and every character here speaks Japanese. This makes no sense, and I found it very strange because the game's initial presentation and menu options made me believe that this is not a detail they would skimp on. I'm also going to ding the game on some of its soundtrack choices because some of this stuff doesn't fit at all. Give this a listen. This is so strange. It's evocative of a modern hero movie fight montage rather than something fitting the setting itself. And if that's not bad enough, the game also does this absolutely horrible thing of modernizing beautiful cultural music and mixing it with trap beats.
What the f is this?
I also have a bone to pick with the canon mode and the dialogue options, because I come from a very simple place. If you have choices that do nothing for the gameplay, leave them out. Do not masquerade as a game where your choices have agency over the story because you're asking me to get involved in a system where my choices don't matter. And you're also wasting time and resources writing and recording different lines that do nothing for the experience itself. And yes, there are some choices that do have consequences, like sparing targets, choosing or denying someone entry to your league, or romance options. But the rest of like 90% of choices are otherwise meaningless. I'm now going to put up a spoiler warning, because I'm going to talk about the ending. Shadows is very underwhelming in this respect, and I'm not saying this about how you put an end to the Shinbakufu conspiracy. Yes, the end of this group does feel somewhat dull. How you assassinate Mitsuhide and the last member of the group simply gives up and surrenders the box in exchange for his life. But this, to me, actually was quite purposeful. Not every ending is received with a fanfare. Sometimes we complete our goal and feel empty, because we don't know what comes next, or how to exist outside of the confines of a goal that defined our struggles. This is a very interesting exploration on the idea of post-achievement depression, and it's not what my problem is about. My problem is the lack of conclusiveness here. We finally get the box back, we don't get to see what it contains, if it's an Isu artifact. In fact, the box was absent for the entirety of the story outside of knowing that it exists and we have to get it back. It's like a shittier Pulp Fiction briefcase. We then return the box, find out that there's 2 more boxes, one of which Hanzo returns, and the matter of the last box is never tackled. We also find out that Naoe's mother may have been alive all this time, that she's quote-unquote closer than we think, but at no point you can do anything to find her. I don't think I have ever exclaimed "what" as loudly as I did when I saw the credits roll, because too much is left unfinished. The game left me in a very unsatisfying way with more questions than answers. Even this mysterious figure that breaks the fourth wall to talk directly to you at the start, it warns you that you're lied to, about a she who is to be wary of. But this plot is straight up dropped very early in the story and never returns. I get that it's meant to relate in some way to the absolute mess of a modern storyline the AC universe has, but it boggles my f***ing mind as to what happened to it. Did they forget this character? Could they not be bothered? I really tried to get some answers. I tried to do some of those animus anomalies, but the game was telling me to advance further in the story, which I've already finished. I don't know what happened here, but this pain to have a story that just threatens to be good, and then have it devolve into a narrative that is dull, flawed, and lacking, very much contributes to my mixed feelings on this game. Alright, before we wrap up, I did promise I'd discuss a conspiracy theory of sorts that I have about this game. Yasuke's inclusion as a protagonist, as I said before, definitely struck me as rather strange, especially because the internet in its current state tends to be very unkind when it comes to putting people of color in settings where they feel like they may not belong to. If you know the Netflix meme and its many variations, you probably know what I'm talking about. This is the bit that gave me pause, because why play into it by making Yasuke a protagonist rather than a side character? I mean, his journey from slave to respected warrior can be very well represented from that perspective too. You could say, well, gaming industry execs are just clueless and stupid, to which I would agree, some of these pricks should really f*** off. But it's unlikely that a company such as Ubisoft wouldn't have marketing analysts saying, hey, in this political climate, this is a bad idea. And that's when I thought, what if that's rather the point? You see, companies have learned that right-wing personalities are actually a fantastic tool for marketing. Drop a subject controversial to them and they're gonna make such a mess out of it that they'll generate buzz far beyond what any marketing campaign can buy. And to some extent this must have worked. Shadows has been by far one of their most successful launches to date. But at the same time, I don't think they realized how unhinged right-wing grifters are becoming. Remember, these people get genuinely mad at things they'd never have to interact with. Ugh, I hate how you can make Yasuke gay. I mean, I had to pursue this romance, which does say a lot about me, but it's woke and bad. Oh. So anyway, Ubisoft had to awkwardly issue a statement about pursuing harassment charges, to which the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Huh, yeah, I wonder what they mean by harassment here. It's not like these people have a habit of instigating harassment towards those who don't fit their worldview. Always a persecution complex with these guys. I mean, granted, I don't think some of them are pulling the green hair look, no shade, but to point at them and say that they're the sole reason a game has failed, or to imply that being willing to hire people like them is what makes a game bad, that's just absolute lunacy. A lot of these people were saying go and create your own games for yourselves, and honestly, how about you people do that? Oh, you already are? How's that going for you? Oh. Props to Ubisoft for being willing to pursue charges against those who'd harass their employees, but it's not a good look that they are the ones who directly or indirectly made the choice that put them there in the first place. This entire spectacle was fascinating to witness. Great to see communities that are finally getting tired of the endless grifting from these weirdos. Their obnoxious takes were pushed so hard to the point where people switched to actively rooting for Ubisoft's success. Hell, it nearly made me root for them too, which I sincerely do not want to. You hate Ubisoft because of your anti-woke nonsense. I hate Ubisoft because of abuse, greed, and shoddy anti-consumer practices. We are not the same.
With that all being said...
This brings me to the conclusion of this video. Assassin's Creed Shadows is definitely one of the better games released by Ubisoft in quite some time. Not better, period, just better compared to their own games. There are a lot of things to be appreciated, but it's held down by the many horrible hallmarks of Ubisoft design. That to me makes it a game that is in a positive mediocrity of sorts. If I were to compare it to other action games set in Japan, like Rise of the Ronin and Ghost of Tsushima, with the latter being the more positive one, by a country mile, might I add, I'd say Shadows would be right in the middle. But would I recommend it? Here's the thing, the game is 80 euros or whatever equivalent have you. It's quite expensive for its asking price, and it doesn't really do anything mind-blowing to justify it. In fact, it even has the nerve to ask for more money through its microtransactions. I know I haven't talked a lot about them, how they don't fit aesthetically, or how they're rather expensive, or how I think some of it might even be AI art. But it sucks. It really does. It sucks to have to look at an experience, be rather pleasantly surprised by the work that the developers have created, then circle back at the financial reality of a product and be negative about something that, realistically, developers have no say in. So, unfortunately, I have to end by saying that, no, I don't recommend ACS, certainly not for its asking price. Japan has been a sort of low-hanging fruit for this series. I know I salivated over an Assassin's Creed experience set in Japan for a long time, but now that it's finally here, it's unfortunately too late. There are games that do what it does much better, from combat to narrative. Ghost of Tsushima is the game that I've used as comparison, and I would wholeheartedly recommend it over Shadows, even if you're an AC fan. It's an exquisite game, and even has an insanely solid multiplayer standalone mode that, at no point, asks for more money with any sort of microtransaction bullshit. I know it's pretty much as expensive as Shadows, but it's feature complete and also has stayed consistently at the same price for nearly 5 years. And if there's one thing I always say about prices, is that you can always trust the quality of a game that has managed to maintain its asking price. Ironically, you can look at other Ubisoft games as proof of that, or the many other flops throughout the industry. And that's all for this video. As always, thanks for watching, do subscribe and like if you've enjoyed or valued my input. I'm sure it helps somewhere in the YouTube algorithm. I've been working on some videos in the meantime, one on Ghost of Tsushima, as it just so happens, and one on Kojima's Death Stranding. I intend to release these a bit later, as both of them have upcoming sequels this year, and I think it might be a good way to grow the channel by posting them closer to their release dates. At any rate, thanks again for watching, and of course, have a good one.